Hello gamers, welcome to another comparison video featuring the Razer Viper V2 Pro. This time it's going up against the Fnatic Bolt. The Bolt arrived a few months ago and for me it's one of the biggest surprises from a manufacturer that I've seen in recent memories, just because it feels like it should be a premium tier mouse. So how does it square up against one of the actual premium tier mice that's available? Well, I'll be comparing shape, performance and more in this video. First of all, don't forget to like and subscribe because I'm sure you're a kind person. Please. So the Fnatic Bolt is 120.89mm long, 55.44mm wide and 38.53mm tall, and weighs 67 grams in black and 69 grams in white. Viper V2 Pro is 126.7mm long, 57.6mm wide and 37.8mm tall, and weighs 58 grams. The shapes between these two have some similarities and visually they do look alike, but the finer details are where they differ. The main similarity for me would be just the sides of the mouse, which have a similar curvature going inside and out. The Bolt is more focused on being used with a claw grip. The hump sits a little further at the back of the mouse, providing a bit of support for the palm and for it to be secure against your hand. Once the peak of the hump has been reached on the Bolt, it's almost a straight line down to the end. The hump on the Viper V2 Pro is a lot more rounded and sits almost dead center with a smooth curvature from the top to the bottom. This will help in providing comfort for pretty much most grip types. The other difference is the buttons on the Bolt don't hang over the sides, giving you some extra room for your fingers. The Bolt is a bit smaller in most areas on the mouse, which means that I feel like it won't really be suitable for many, well I guess I mean grown-ups with regular sized hands. For me personally, the Viper is the better shape as it's just a lot more comfortable with the palm grip. When I use a claw grip, the Bolt starts to get comfortable, but it's still a bit too small for me, so I prefer to use the Viper for that also. The coating here is very similar to each other. They are both coarse matte coatings, but the Viper is ever so slightly coarser. I can see the Bolt coating being a bit more favoured by most because it is ever so slightly smoother. The main switches on the mice are probably the make or break for most people's choice between the two. The Bolt is using the highly acclaimed KLGM 8.0s, whilst the Razer Viper sports their own optical switch. I personally prefer the Bolt switches. The Kel switches are just so crispy and consistent. I think at the moment they are probably the ones to beat for me. The Viper switches aren't bad by any means, but they really don't have the same consistency or crispiness in comparison to the Bolt. And here's a brief sound check. The side buttons are in similar locations, but the Bolt is probably a lot more superior just because they are bigger and there's also a larger gap between the two, making it a bit easier to tell them apart in an instant. On the underside of the Bolt you have a switch so you can go between 2.4 GHz wireless, Bluetooth and off. The DPI button for the Bolt sits at the top. For the Viper you have the on-off button, which also doubles up as the DPI cycle, so all the extra functions are tied to this little circle. The scroll wheels are quite different, with the Bolt providing a very smooth and relatively quiet experience. The Viper V2 Pro however is a bit different, with it being a bit noisy and slightly less smooth feeling. So for me personally, the Bolt has the better scroll wheel. The feet for both mice are using 100% virgin PTFE. With the Viper V2 Pro you get 4 pads, 2 at the top of the mouse, 1 larger one at the bottom and also a sensor ring. With the Bolt you just get 2 long ones at the top and bottom. The feet are pretty much going to perform the same, but I feel like the lack of sensor ring does somewhat make me feel a little less confident, especially in regards to any potential scraping on the mouse pad. I think this is mainly down to a personal thing, because honestly once you've had a mouse that scrapes on your mouse pad it haunts you forever. For battery life you're looking at around 80 hours on constant motion with the Viper V2 Pro and with it on 1000 Hz. With the Fnatic Bolt they say you get 110 hours on one charge, but they don't specify whether or not that's with constant motion, what polling rate it is, or anything really. I'd say maybe it's safe to say that the battery life would be similar to one another. For the cables, both come with a paracord Type-C cable and USB adapters for the dongles as well. The cable is different for the Bolt, it's a pronged cable, something that for me personally is a big no-no, because then it's not going to really be compatible with other devices that requires USB Type-C. Very naughty and not friendly to the environment. Anyway, on the rare occasion you do need to plug your mouse in to charge, both of these cables are great. They are super light, so you hardly notice them when you do have to give your mouse some juice. Software is always an interesting battle for me. I'll look for ease of use, loading speed if it's required, and functionality. In theory, Fnatic should have this one, but their software has been painfully slow for me. Sometimes when I load it up, it says that I have a bolt but it's disconnected. Other times I load it up, it says there's a bolt but it just won't let me click on it to change anything. Other times it just doesn't show up at all. After about 30 minutes of restarting it over and over again, it finally announced that my mouse needed a firmware update. It's taken ages for me to get the software to finally work. When it does, it's very simple, so I'm not sure how it performs so badly considering the simplicity of it. Synapse is better as it at least works consistently. It is a bit slow and bloated, but once you get to the section that you actually need, it's well laid out and does what you need it to do. Normally I rip into Synapse a bit, but because this is a comparison, the Bolt software really does make Synapse look great. Also, with the Viper V2 Pro you can make changes to the mouse wirelessly. With the Bolt you can only configure it when it's plugged in. Having said that, the software for both of these mice are not required, but you will obviously miss out on firmware updates. For the sensors, the Viper has the edge because it's newer, with it using a PAW 3950, whilst the Fnatic Bolt is using a 3370. Honestly, the differences won't really be noticeable, but the Viper V2 Pro does have the edge in terms of having larger numbers on the spec sheet. If you're a big nerd, it's probably impressive in terms of the technology that it has, but if you're someone that's a bit less involved, most of the time the lesser sensor will be just fine anyway. As far as in-game use goes, both of these mice have been excellent. I can only really pick the Viper V2 Pro as superior just because of the shape being a lot more comfortable for my hand over the Fnatic Bolt. But both of these mice are fantastic, so as long as it suits your grip type, I don't think you'll have any problems in game. In terms of the pricing, this is where the biggest difference lies. With the Razer Viper V2 Pro, it's costing at around about $150, £150 or €160, but for the Fnatic Bolt it's around about $80, £80 or €90. Both of these prices were at the time of this video, so it's somewhat clear in terms of which one comes out on top in terms of cost. Even though you're getting some great hardware with the Viper V2 Pro, the Fnatic Bolt is significantly cheaper and there's really not much of a noticeable difference in terms of performance or build quality between the two. So overall, both of these mice are pretty great. I would say that if you're someone that's looking for a claw grip mouse, I'd probably go for the Bolt. The cheaper cost is just outstanding, and honestly, in terms of quality, it pretty much is on the same level as the Viper V2 Pro, which for something that is almost half the price is pretty incredible. For me, I'd have to go for the Viper V2 Pro personally, just because of it being more comfortable, and after a while using the Bolt can get a bit painful as my hand eventually makes a big fist around it, so it's not the greatest for my big meaty hand. It's strange that I am comparing these two mice that are just substantially different in price, but here we are. The Viper V2 Pro is definitely a good mouse. I say it's worth the price because of the technology that goes into it, and it really does set itself apart from the competition with that. But if you're on a tighter budget or you just don't think it's worth the financial cost of a mouse, the Bolt is a very good alternative option. Ultimately though, it comes down to one final thing. The Viper doesn't have any RGB, whereas the Bolt scroll wheel does, so it's by far the superior choice. That's all for this comparison. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content.